is Reginald Sibeko? Where did you grow up? What were you like as a young person?
Reginald Sibeko is a young man from Guatemala Springs in the east end of Johannesburg. That's where I grew up, born and bred. I've only left the east end once I was working in the north of Johannesburg. But yeah, as a young man, I suppose I was like any other kid in a township, full of curiosity, full of life, full of expectation, and considering the fact that I grew up in the space when at the dawn of democracy. So there was full of hope in the space where I was in. And yeah, I loved sports, I loved music. I was pretty involved in music at church and at school as well. But yeah, I always sort of was very skeptical of the arts and sport, because largely in the township what you see is somebody who goes into that type of industry but end up not really making it, or if they do make it, they end up poor after they've made it. So I tried to focus a little bit more on my academic than emphasizing my creative side of talents, so to say.
Okay, and what were you listening to in your car on your way here?
I was listening to William McDowell. He's an American gospel artist. Yeah, that was one of the songs that I was listening to.
All right. Can you just tell us a little bit about your career and qualifications in a nutshell?
Okay, so post-matric, I wanted to go into an engineering field. So I wanted to go and study civil engineering. But when I wanted to actually register, because I was late, I couldn't find space to get into civil engineering. And there was only one option that was available to me, which was IT. And I went into IT accidentally. It wasn't a choice that I had made, but it was more of, do you either sit at home in the township for an entire year, or you actually do something? So I studied IT. I did IT, and post doing my IT, I then did IT service management. But in terms of career, where I am now, I went into IT from a telecoms perspective, where I was in the networking space, in the system space, as a technical individual. But within a year, I was promoted into a management position, and I've been in management of IT teams and IT operations for the last 12 years now. And I've evolved in my career. Having entered IT in the telecoms and networking space, I've evolved into a much more software and applications-based IT field, where I'm managing operations of large corporations.
And I mean, you've got an MBA.
Yeah.
How long does it take to typically complete an MBA, and what is an MBA?
Well, minimum MBA, you're looking at about 2 years, but largely you're looking at 2.5 years. It can go for longer in flexible institutions where they allow you to do it for over 3 years, etc. But yeah, you're looking at about 2.5 years. What an MBA is, it's a qualification that is a myriad of all facets that make up a business. Okay, an MBA looks at the financial side of the business, looks at the marketing side of a business, looks at the operational side of the business, looks at the strategic side of the business, and looks at the design of the organization as a whole, as to how do you actually design the business from an organizational perspective. So it looks at a number of things, looks at leadership, obviously, looks at the ethics around how you run an entire business. So there's a number of things, and different institutions focus on different aspects of the MBA. So there are ones which are much more leadership focused, and there are those that are more academic and more analytical based, to give a student much more analytical ability to actually just analyze and understand a business.
And in your opinion, when is it better for someone to pursue an MBA?
I suppose it's different for different individuals. So in my career, what I've seen is that when I was younger, I think my second year of being in corporate, I immediately said to myself, well, it was even before that, because prior to me actually getting into the job market, after I'd finished my IT qualifications, I already knew I wanted to do an MBA. I mean, there was a show on TV that displayed an MBA team from Verts that was against the UP team and the University of Cape Town team, and that sparked the interest about being an MBA graduate. But it took me a bit of time before I could actually get to the point where I was saying, okay, let me actually do it. And 2 to 3 years into my career, I said, okay, I want to do this MBA thing, but I did a management course at Gibbs. And when I was doing that course, there were other students who were already doing their MBA. And what I saw there was a mix of largely much more refined managers who have 10 to 20 years of experience in leadership positions who are doing an MBA. But at the same time, in that same space, you'd find young individuals who were 2 to 3 years in the corporate space, who are not actually leading teams, who are not managing anyone, and they're doing this MBA. So it was different for different individuals, and in a Gibbs space, it allowed for that mix of different individuals. I then didn't pursue the MBA at that time. I went back to UJ to do an IT service management course the following year, and then after that, I only then said to myself, okay, let me start looking at this MBA. And at that point, my decision making around why the MBA for me, it was around the level of responsibility I had at the time, and what it meant for my career growth, the next step, and how I would actually make the next step. And I understood that there were skill sets and there was knowledge gaps that I needed to close for me to be able to get into the next space where I needed to be. So at that point, I made the decision to actually go pursue an MBA.
And what are the misconceptions around the MBA program that you would maybe like to dispel? Is it difficult?
That an MBA is for clever people. Totally a huge misconception. An MBA is about an individual who is organized, who's able to manage a project. And the MBA, you have to look at it as a project, because it literally means you have to manage your time, social time. You have to manage your time at work. You have to manage your time academically. It's pressurized. It's a pressurized setup. It's set up that way to actually try and extract your best capabilities. But it's not about intelligent people. And I think largely MBA grads actually perpetuate this idea that for you to be an MBA grad, you have to be pretty much smart. It's not. It's about somebody who's able to take on information and apply it, and that's all it is. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have, that every MBA is a smart person. They're not.
Okay, fair enough. Everyone knows how expensive the MBA program is. So if someone wants to complete an MBA, what advice would you give them in convincing the employers to actually fund it?
I think for employers, it's and I suppose at this point I find myself in that juncture where I'm actually the employer to fund MBAs myself. Some of my employees are going, okay, boss, I think I want to follow your footsteps. I want to do what you've done. And I think the decision has to be made on what is the return on that investment, because it's not a cheap program. I think when I did it, it was about 205,000, and it's now sitting about 250,000 to complete an entire MBA. So you have to say, what is the return on investment? What am I going to get out of this employee? And also, if you want to, if the objective as an employer is to grow this person into the next level and to create a succession plan for somebody to be the next leadership of the business, you have to make that investment, because an MBA is truly one of the greatest investment anybody can make on an employee, because it opens your mind. It allows you to see business is not in your narrow view of where you operate, and in respect to, and largely, we operate in our technical space. Technically, your space. You're either a technical engineer, you're an accountant, or whatever the case may be, you're a marketing individual. You just know your discipline. And what an MBA does is it opens your mind. It says, how do you then look at your discipline in context of everything that is around and what makes the business work? And I think that's really what the employers have to look at and say, is it about creating the next leadership of the business, or is it a matter of just giving somebody an amount of money so that we can retain them? And I know that some employers do that. They then push an individual into an MBA because they know that they can retain that individual for the next 3 to 4 years, and that's the only objective. But I think that's really a short-sighted view of what an MBA should be. It should be about creating the next leadership pipeline for the business.
Okay. An MBA is often referred to as the divorce degree. What kind of support does one need to have in place before pursuing it?
It's not a misconception. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've seen a lot of people go through such things. And I think, again, it goes back to my statement around an MBA is really about, it's a project. You have to manage it as a project. And you have to set out an actual project management plan as to how you're going to manage it. You have to say, what does it mean for my social perspective? What do I do with my family time and family life? And what do I do in terms of planning my academic timetable? What do I do with work? And you have to look at it that way. If you don't do that, if you don't have a plan, because it's not just about, because a lot of people would think the response from my side would be the spouse just has to support you. No, you have to actually come to the party. And I think a lot of individuals who go into an MBA start hiding behind the MBA to actually because they get drained into this world of it's pressure. But if you have not actually planned it correctly, you start finding yourself not being able to give this part of your lifetime. And then all of a sudden you're running around like a mad chicken, a headless chicken, so to say. So I think a lot of it has to do with just managing your time. It's not about support. And I think spouses who end up leaving their partners or doing an MBA get really the short end of the stick. You know, people always think they're such bad people and, you know, they didn't understand. But I don't think it's just about them. It's about the person who's actually pursuing it to actually have a plan of how they're actually going to manage it, not to affect the family. The family has to understand that there will be less time to do certain things. And there's certain gatherings that you won't be able to make. You know, there's friends of mine, and even from our side, where you couldn't make a funeral, a family funeral, and you can't make it. And these are real things that happen during an MBA. You know, there's a wedding of be it a cousin or whatever the case may be. You can't even be there because you're studying for an exam. There's an exam tomorrow. Or there's just so many sacrifices you have to make for that 2.5 years that the family has to understand. But at the very same time, you shouldn't compromise giving them your time. It's very important.
Just before we wrap it up, what are the minimum requirements in order to enroll into an MBA, and where can one go and study towards the program?
Okay, so I know that the South African Qualifications Authority has changed the requirements around how you actually get into an MBA. Previously, you could get into an MBA with just a undergrad and you'll be able to qualify for an MBA. It's not so anymore. You need to have an honors degree for you to be able to get into an MBA. But apart from that, what the business schools have done is they've created a program called a postgraduate in business management, and that postgraduate is an equivalent of an honors degree. So it allows you to do this postgrad. You spend a year doing this postgrad, and then post doing that, then you're able to get into an MBA. And in terms of where you can study an MBA, there's a number of institutions, very reputable institutions, and I think South Africa as a country has one of the best institutions in terms of MBA. I did mine at Handley. You have the likes of Gibbs, which is one of very good institutions. University of Cape Town Business School is quite a good institution. You have Wits Business School as well. You have USB, which is the University of Stellenbosch. So there's quite a number of institutions that are out there that are very reputable and they're very, very highly accredited, and if you look at the ratings of institutions worldwide by Times newspapers, you'll see that our institutions actually fit into the top 100 business schools worldwide. So we've got good business schools in South Africa.
Okay, and on a lighter note, can you just tell us something people don't know about you?
Yo. Something people don't know about me.
Yeah, we know you like music, gospel music.
I love sports. I love football. What else?
What do you do besides studying and working? And
so yeah, this is probably something that people don't know. So one of the things, maybe part of the things that I've learned as a skill doing an MBA is that people actually do not understand and actually don't realize when they engage me that I'm actually an introverted person. And they find this quite difficult to believe. And I said, one of the skills that I was taught in some of the leadership classes when I was doing my MBA is that you have to be able to manage your personality in a way that you're able to adapt and engage people. Now, your personality shouldn't be the one thing that restricts you from engaging and networking with people. And what happens is a lot of the time, people don't actually see introverts as people who actually grow in corporate businesses, because we generally like to be left alone. And now you have to learn the skill of how to actually manage your personality when you're in business, but at the very same time, do not compromise who you are. Because I'm still an introvert, and I enjoy being an introvert. I enjoy being at home, sit and listen to my music, read a book, watch football, and that's me. You know, I'm not one to be always out there having a party or whatever the case may be. I do it once in a while, but generally, I enjoy just being left to be by myself and my boy.
Okay. With that said, then I guess we've heard it all from the horse's mouth. Thank you very much, Reginald.
Thank you.